All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you to everybody who has joined us here in the room and via the live stream. My name is Kate Audette, and I am the Director of State Government Relations here at Boston Children's Hospital, and I'm really excited to welcome you to this joint grand rounds between the Office of Community Health and the Office of Government Relations, where the topic is the importance of the 2020 Census for Latino children and families. So I want to take a quick second to thank the team from the Office of Government Relations, as well as Children's Health, our interns, staff from the Hale Family Center for Families, and the Spanish team for making this program possible today, as well as all of the other tremendous programming that is happening here at Children's during Latino Heritage Month. So you might be wondering, it's Latino Heritage Month, why is there a session that is talking about the census and Latino communities? Well, it's really simple. The census matters. It matters for children, it matters for families, and it has special importance in the Latino community. Our future prosperity and well-being depends on the quality of the information that we gather from the Census Bureau. Census data guides us in a wide range of decision-making, both in the public and private sectors, and those decisions impact each and every one of us. That is because census data is used to ensure the effective allocation of billions of dollars of federal money, state money, and city dollars. In addition, it helps with the distribution of political representation in Congress. So there are three takeaways that I want you to keep in mind during today's program, and that is participation in the census is safe, it is easy, and it is important. There's something else that I want you to know. Even though the census hasn't started yet, the 2020 census is already in jeopardy of a potential undercounting of children and the Latino community. During the last census in 2010, 1 million children under the age of 5 were not counted. When we miss counting children, particularly very young children in the census, it can have long-lasting consequences for their families, their community, our nation, and even how they access their health care. Many of these consequences are far-reaching. They don't just last until the time the next census happens. They can have decades-long repercussions. That's why it's important for the Boston Children's Hospital community to know that caring for our children also means ensuring that they get counted in the 2020 census. In addition, Latinos are now the nation's second largest population group and growing, and currently represent about 1 out of every 6 people in this country. Having a full and accurate data count from the Latino community is critical for our country's economic, social, and civic well-being. Unfortunately, during the last census in 2010, roughly 400,000 Latino children ages 0 to 4 went uncounted. I don't have to tell many of you in this room that children's hospitals are a trusted voice. Parents and members of the community come to places like Boston Children's Hospital when they are concerned about their child, and they literally trust us with their children's life. This is not an exaggeration. If a trusted voice like ours says that the 2020 census is important, it will help get out that message, and we need to start getting that message out now. Since you've joined us here today in the room and via the Zoom live stream, I'm guessing that you're up to this task and that you're ready to learn more. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our 3 speakers that have joined us today to talk a little bit more about some of the issues that I've highlighted. Before I do that, you should have all have received, when you walked into the room, a white note card. Those note cards are where you can jot down any questions that you have for our speakers, and we'll take those at the end. If you've joined us on the live stream, there's a chat box where you can enter your questions. Those will then go into the queue, so when we get to the Q&A that we have that as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce our 3 speakers. I'll take my seat, and then when they come up, they will individually introduce themselves again. The first is Nancy Wagman from the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center. Second, we will hear from Sebastian Zapata, the mayor of the City of Boston Census Liaison. And then last but certainly not least, our community partner, Alexandra Oliver Gavelia from Sociedad Latina. So with that, Nancy, do you want to come up?
Thank you, Kate. And in fact, your introduction to this topic was basically most of my presentation, so I could pretty much sit down, but I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Nancy Wagman. I'm the Kids Count Director at the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center. And we're an independent, nonpartisan public policy research group focusing on issues that affect the well-being of children and families in the Commonwealth. So what I wanted to talk about today is, of course, the census and why. Well, the census creates the picture of who we are. We have about 1.4 million kids in the Commonwealth, and the census gives us the information that helps us understand that picture. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So as Kate mentioned, the undercount of young children is a particular challenge for the census, and over the past few decades, it has in fact gotten worse. Now, nationwide, about 2 million kids under 5 were missed in the last census. Now, Kate mentioned the 1 million undercount. That's true, 2 million were missed, and then there's some double counting of kids in certain instances, but then, so the net undercount of little kids in the 2010 census was over 1 million kids, about 400,000, as Kate mentioned, net undercount of Latinx kids. There were about 20,000 young kids missed in the 2010 census in Massachusetts. Now think about what that means. If you miss counting young kids, what happens when you're trying to project how many kindergarten classrooms to open up in the next few years? Or if you're a business, where might you want to put a clothing store for young kids, or where do we need more daycare centers? So these numbers really, really matter and have an impact in our lives and in our communities. So why do we do the census? Well, the Constitution says so. It's right there, right there. Article 1, Section 2 says every 10 years, we count every person who is a resident here in the US, and the first census was in 1790. Now the census, I want to be very clear, the census is always a reflection of the government's viewpoint of its time. In 1790, it says we count everybody, but we measure, when we do the totals, free white people count as 1. The people who were enslaved counted as 3/5 of a person. The first explicit mention of the Hispanic Latinx community in the census was in 1930. In the enumeration of race, there was a category called Mexicans. Okay, the census as we know it in understanding sort of the Hispanic Latinx community emerges first in 1970, really as a result of the civil rights movements to ensure that everybody had representation and was counted. And you see the 1970 census asks, is a person's origin or descent Mexican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, etc. So that was the first time we get that full count of the Hispanic community across the states. So the questions, what are the questions in 2020? Very simple. How many people in a household? Is the home owned or rented? The phone number if they need to do follow-up. And then for each person, name, the relationship to the person, and I'll show you what that means. Sex, age and date of birth, Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin, and race. That's it. The whole thing should take about 10 minutes. So that's all the census is asking us in 2020, okay? Now, the point, as Kate said, the point is we need to count every single person in the household, no matter who they are. This is what the census form will look like. And you can see, the question is, how is this person related? Is it a spouse? Is it a same-sex spouse? Is it an adopted son or daughter, a stepson? Is it a grandchild? Is it a other relative? Is it a roommate or a housemate? Is it a foster child? It doesn't matter what the relationship of a person is in your household. Every single person in that household needs to get counted. Every single person. If it's a tenant, if it's your kid's stepkid, every single person in a household gets counted. Here are the questions that I mentioned about race and ethnicity. So there's a separate question for Hispanic Latinx. It says, is this person of Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And then yes or no, and you can put Salvadoran, Dominican, and however you want to define it. You can choose how you want to express what your ethnicity is. And then there's another separate question about race. And again, black, white, and you can say I'm black and I'm Jamaican, or I'm American, Indian, and I'm Navajo. You can you have room in this census that's different to write more information about how you choose to define your race. What's not on the census? Citizenship. This question is not on the census. Thanks to a lot of public outcry, made a difference. This question, the citizenship question, is not on the census. So that's really important to remember. It's not there. So unlike in past years, there are 3 ways to respond to the census this year. You can answer online on your computer. You can do it by phone. You can call up a phone number, and there will be people who speak different phone numbers for people who speak different languages, and you can kind of tell your answers to this certified person by phone. Or you can mail it the old-fashioned way when you get it, if you get a paper form. So there are 3 ways to respond. And the point is to count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. And this is how it's going to work. There are a bunch of letters that'll come to, now the census goes to a location. It goes to an address, okay? It doesn't get addressed to you as a person. It gets addressed to your address. In March, you'll get a letter that'll have your unique household address ID, and then a language assistance sheet, and it'll give you the URL to go online, fill it out, of the phone numbers. Then some people, particularly in the western part of the state here, will actually get a paper form as well on that first mailing, because of it's just a little, PO boxes and things. It's a little harder to get actual addresses. Then there'll be a second reminder letter, don't forget, a third reminder postcard, and then April 1st, which is Census Day, if by April you haven't responded, you get another reminder letter, and you'll get a paper questionnaire. So everybody gets a bunch of letters and reminders about either filling it out online or doing it by phone. And if you wait long enough, you will get a paper questionnaire to fill it out. And then mailing 5 is if you haven't responded, you get, it's not too late, don't forget to fill out your census form. And if you haven't done that between May and July, then the Census Bureau will send out a person to collect information, to collect the information, because we want to get every single person. We're hoping people will just respond on their own from all those reminders, online or by phone or with the paper questionnaire. But if not, someone will come knocking on your door, like in that painting. That's called Taking the Census. It's from 1854. So what's at stake? Well, lots at stake. Kate mentioned congressional apportionment, state legislative districts. The census creates a picture of who we are for government, for research, for business, and making sure we get our fair share of billions in funding. So these are our state legislative districts for the State House. These get drawn based on the census numbers that come out. So if people don't fill out their census, they're not going to get their fair share of representation in the State House and in Congress. What's at stake is also accurate data. Think about all the data you as health and social science professionals use, whether you're talking about child asthma rates. Well, the number, you're looking at the number of kids with asthma and you're comparing it to the total number of kids in the Commonwealth. If that number's wrong, your child asthma rates are gonna be wrong. If you're trying to identify where are medically underserved areas, if you don't have the population counts right, that statistic is gonna be wrong. So much of the work we do is rebased every year on, every 10 years on numbers that come from the census. There's also a lot of federal money at stake in Massachusetts. These dollars that I have up here, special education, Title I for low-income schools, WIC funding, Head Start, these are what I call head count dollars, that the dollars that come to Massachusetts very explicitly come based on a formula based on population counts from the census. So if we miss kids in the census, we miss out on big bunches of federal money. There's an estimate that for every school-age low-income kid missed in the census, school district can lose out on $1,700 per year in Title I dollars. That's a lot of money. So what are some of the challenges ahead? Well, it's an online census and everybody doesn't have internet. And in fact, we know that about more than 1 in 3 low-income households statewide do not have access to the internet. There are concerns about data security and confidentiality. I put a one-way sign up there because the census data goes into the Census Bureau. It only goes one way in. It can't come out. Your personal, private information cannot come out of the Census Bureau. And the Census Bureau will never ask for your social security number, bank account, credit card, money, or donations. If somebody comes knocking on the door saying, I'm from the census, give me your social security number, that's a scam. That's a concrete box. And the reason I put a concrete box up here is because I want you to understand that your personally identifiable information is protected. Remember, I said it goes only one way into the Census Bureau. Then it gets put in what I like to think of as a concrete box. It can't come out. Congress can't ask for your personally identifiable information. The president can't ask. ICE can't ask. Law enforcement can't ask. Your landlord can't ask. Nobody gets access to your personally identifiable information. And in fact, this information is protected by a very strong provision in the US laws called Title 13 in the US Code. Every Census Bureau employee takes a lifetime sworn obligation to never disclose any individually identifying information, okay? Your census answers can't be used against you by any government agency or court, and a violation of this is a federal crime, federal prison sentence, up to 5 years, $250,000 fine, or both. So remember that these data are protected. Imagine the concrete box that your personal responses go into. So hard to count communities, immigrants, renters, we've already talked a little bit about this, and we'll be hearing some more about why some communities are particularly hard to count. This is a map of hard to count Massachusetts, but I want to point out this is a census map of the Latino communities in the Boston area. And what you can sort of a little hard to see, but I hope you can see that it almost exactly mirrors what are called the hard to count census communities as well. And we know that communities of immigrants, communities where people might distrust government, where people don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking English, are more at risk of not filling out the census form. But finally, I do want to reemphasize the challenge of counting kids, because kids, unlike in the hard to count communities where you have some folks who don't fill out the form, kids are more likely to be missed because they're left off the form, where a family fills out their census form, but they don't put all the kids on. Whether it's a multi-generational household, there's sort of confusion of multi-family households, shared custody situations, newborns, nervousness about listing all the kids, or maybe even not realizing that all kids should be counted. Now, what I want to end up with here is just for this audience, there's some special circumstances to make sure for counting every child. And any baby born before April 1st, 2020 at 11:59 p.m., even if still in the hospital, gets counted, okay? So those little babies in your NICU, they get counted, okay? And children who are in hospitals on April 1st for sort of routine stays, they would get counted at their usual residence. So you all can have a role in making sure that we make sure every single person is counted at the right place and only once. So as Kate said, responding to the census is safe. Think about the concrete box. It's easy. 1, 2, 3, you can do it online. You can do it over the phone, on your own time. It's important. There's a lot at stake. And you are, in fact, among the most trusted messengers for our communities about how important the census is and what's at stake. So I thank you very much for coming here, for being part of this. And here are hashtags if you are social media folks. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Hey, everyone. Buenos días. ¿Cómo estamos? It's good to see everybody here today. My name is Sebastian Zapata. I'm the census liaison over at Boston City Hall. And essentially what that means is I'm directing our efforts on behalf of Mayor Walsh and the city of Boston to have the most accurate, inclusive, and equitable count possible ahead of next year's 2020 census. So I do want to once again just thank Nancy for that amazing presentation. There will be some overlap based off of what she said, but again, I think it's important to just sort of reiterate these facts and sort of help amplify each other's points and be broadcasters. So I'm sort of giving the perspective more so from the city of Boston in particular. And so again, Nancy sort of profiled a little bit of what does it mean to be hard to count. So essentially what that deems is based off of the Census Bureau statistics, any tract that's below 73% return rate, 2010, that's what's deemed hard to count. So historically speaking, the city of Boston is the 9th hardest city to count among the largest 100 US cities. And in particular, we have the largest amount of folks living in hard to count census tracts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. About 63% of all inhabitants, residents in the city of Boston live in a hard to count census tract. Again, Nancy sort of already pointed out some of what these demographic communities might look like. But we're talking about renters, which in the city of Boston, approximately 60% of all Bostonians are renters. Recent immigrants, we know that 30% roughly are in our city population are foreign born. 1 in 5 city Bostonians are Latinos themselves. In particular, nearly 50% of our BPS students, at least one parent is foreign born. Again, in terms of population, speak little or no English. 40% of all Bostonians speak more than one language other than English at home. Children under the age of 5, as Nancy profiled once again, 11% of all Bostonian households have multi-families, and individuals with lower incomes and educational attainment as well. We know that roughly 50% of all Bostonians make under $35,000. So that's some sort of hard data. And you just saw this map, but I wanted to blow it up once again in terms of talking about when looking at the city of Boston in particular. Here, you can basically interpret this map as the redder it is, the more hard to count it's been deemed. Again, this is all based on 2010 return rates. So these are the metrics that we're talking about when we talk about census tracts and looking at it from a neighborhood to neighborhood perspective. It should come as no surprise that the pockets that are the reddest are overlapping with the pockets that are usually lower educational attainment, lower socioeconomic standing, those that have particular pockets of high immigrant communities, such as East Boston, such as Roxbury, Mattapan, Dorchester. When you look at communities such as the ones I just mentioned, all of Roxbury, all of Dorchester, all of Mattapan, all of Allston, they're all deemed hard to count census tracts within those neighborhoods. And all the census tracts in East Boston, except for 2, are deemed hard to count. And that's because one of those census tracts is the airport. So no one actually lives there, of course. But again, I think this map really spells out when we're looking from the city's perspective of where do we have to tackle it from an equity perspective. That's not to say that we don't have to touch communities like JP, which certainly have these demographics living in there from a people perspective, but from a place-based perspective, we know the communities that need to have a little bit of a heavier touch than others. Again, as Nancy mentioned, there's a couple changes from the census that's upcoming next year from 10 years ago, and historically speaking. It's the first digital census once again. It's the first time that all of Suffolk County will be pushed to primarily do it online. So what does that mean in terms of a digital equity perspective and component? We know in the city of Boston, Bostonians have a 99% access rate to broadband internet, but 20% have no adoption of said broadband internet. So coming from that aspect, we've sort of talked about how do we activate places where people already congregate, such as our libraries and Boston Centers for Youth and Families, which if you're not familiar, they're essentially a city-run Boys and Girls Club or YMCA. And also working in partnership with those kind of community centers to talk about when the enumeration process starts, how do we activate these places, knowing that they have computer labs and say, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. and then from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. you can come in. We have designated technology for you to use and someone that's been trained on staff to sort of help you walk through the process, just sort of lower the barrier of participation as much as possible. Another big change and challenge moving forward is the fact that there's been severe reduced funding for the census operation. Essentially, the Census Bureau has the same budget from 10 years ago. And if you've ever worked with a budget, if you have the same stagnation budget from 10 years ago in today's dollars, that's a massive cut. So they're hiring less people to actually do the door knocking operation. So it's really incumbent on us to be amplifiers and to be broadcasters about the fact that the census is coming, educate our people as much as possible why it's so important, and really encourage them to participate as much as possible. And again, the citizenship question itself, that's been a lot of the attention placed on the 2020 census so far. I cannot stress enough about the fact that that question is not on next year's form. So if anyone has any ambiguity around that, you can safely say that the question itself will not be on the form. Once again, the citizenship question is not on the 2020 census form. And a lot of what we talked about in terms of City Hall's perspective is how do we overcome these obstacles through partnership? Again, there's a lot of fear and mistrust when it comes to the federal government, particularly in recent immigrant and Latino populations, and for very real reasons, whether it's DACA, DAPA, public charge, how folks are actually being held at the border itself. There's a lot of ambiguity every single day about just the nasty vitriol that's coming from Washington and the Trump administration. Hence why we wanted to really focus on the partnerships that we have existing to sort of be these trusted voices like the medical professionals in the room. As Kate mentioned, folks come into this hospital every single day and trust you with the lives of their loved ones. So the hope is that by having you be an amplifier, they'll trust you and say the census matters for whatever reason it might be. It could be because there's more federal funding to go towards the programs that they depend on, like Head Start or like free school lunches in BPS, Boston Public Schools. Or it could be because of Medicare, Medicaid. It could be because of Section 8 vouchers. Whatever it may be, it's really incumbent on us once again to just be these trusted voices and tell folks it's okay, it's safe, it's secure, and there are simple ways to go about doing it. So again, in terms of just talking about the impact of a complete count in our communities, the privacy component of it, and the fact that every person who resides in the US should be counted, regardless of any status, whether that's immigration, able body, socioeconomic, educational attainment. It does not matter in terms of the census. It does not want to discriminate against anyone. And again, it's incumbent on us to explain that to folks. So far in terms of what the City of Boston has been doing is a lot of events that just sort of raise education and awareness. On the left, you'll see a kickoff we did in Roxbury. Again, all the census tracts in Roxbury are deemed hard to count. Historically speaking, the communities that live within that space tend to fill out the census form at a very low clip. So by partnering with folks like Madison Park CDC, who's a local community development corporation, as well as relying on some trusted voices like elected representatives such as Mayor Walsh, Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, Councilors Kim Janey and Councilor Michelle Wu, just being these people that have these platforms and utilizing them for the betterment of the Commonwealth and our communities. And on the right, you'll see in terms of partnering with advocacy groups, the Asian American community and Asian immigrant community is very strong in the City of Boston. Again, we have a large foreign-born population that lives in our communities. So as much as we can partner with them, that's what we're sort of trying to aim to do. We have a webpage that we've launched around sort of just getting general census information out to folks. You can find a one-pager on there that we've translated into multiple languages, which are Spanish, traditional Chinese, Vietnamese, Haitian Creole, and Cape Verdean Creole. Those are the top 5 requested languages in the City of Boston in terms of translation services, as well as you'll find some other helpful links. On the right is sort of the Boston Counts campaign that we've launched in a couple different languages I wanted to highlight. And another big thing that we're doing, and I'm proud to announce, is the fact that Mayor Walsh has invested $100,000 into the FY City budget to do efforts around census awareness and education. So soon enough, in the month of October, we'll be launching about 12 mini grants in reinvesting back into our communities to say, you are the trusted voices, you are the places and spaces people go when they feel safe and they feel that they need to be connected. You know much better than a bureaucrat like myself or the people that work within the concrete structures of City Hall to say, here's why the census is so important for us. Please encourage them to participate. And those grants, again, will range between $5,000 and $10,000 to do education awareness campaign work around this 2020 census. And lastly, in terms of our big picture efforts, we have our Complete Count Committee that we've launched. These are about 25 folks that all sit on this committee to sort of be these trusted voices and to be external partners. You actually might recognize this woman on top or the bottom right actually is Kate Audette, who's our MC for the event. So thank you, Kate and Children's, for sitting on this committee. We took very much an industry and a sectoral approach around saying, you are the trusted resident experts in whatever community you might be in, whether that's place or people-based again, and sort of bring them together and coalesce around the table saying, what assets do we have available that we can leverage? We don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel here. Understanding what sort of the new barriers are, let's work to circumnavigate them. and sort of here are all the subcommittees. So each person that's on the Clean Count Committee is responsible for helping the chair or co-chair their individual subcommittee. Again, Kate Audette here from Children's, as well as Michael Curry from the Mass Healthcare Centers, is helping to lead the charge around healthcare itself. So it's about bringing folks within that sphere to, again, understand what are the existing assets that we have that we can leverage to move forward, and talk about what messaging might resonate the best with people. Because at the end of the day, it's about taking the general talking points of saying, you know, it's about representation, it's about redistricting, it's about federal dollars, but really trying to push them and see what makes the most sense, who communicates it, how it's communicated, and when is it communicated. So that's pretty much a just big picture understanding of what the city of Boston is doing. I would encourage you to please feel free to reach out to myself if you'd like to get more information and just be included with the city's efforts. And again, just thank you so much for even being here in the room. October 1st marks 6 months out from Census Day proper. So it's really, again, incumbent on us to start thinking about how do we activate the spaces that we congregate a majority of the time, and talking into the folks that are going to be most impacted by the census should they be undercounted. Thank you.
All right, so as Alex is coming, just a quick reminder that after she wraps up with her remarks, we're going to take your questions. So if you're live streaming, please feel free to get those going in the chat box, or if you're here in the room, those white index cards, and then we will have, where are our question collectors? Are they, there we go. Question collectors are all kind of in the back of the room, so they'll be around when your card is ready to go. Just lift it in the air, they'll come grab it, and we'll start questions and answers after Alex. So Alex?
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. I do not have a PowerPoint. It will be what it will be, but I think what I have to say is, you know, they've already said all the statistics. I'm gonna focus more in terms of community engagement and families. I will say, I think, you know, we are privileged to live in a city that is supportive of immigrants, supportive of undocumented people. And unfortunately, that's not the state of our country. So I would start with one of the major pieces that makes it really challenging when we're talking about Latino families. We feel very targeted, and we are very targeted, and our community is being targeted, and we are being viewed as criminals. So I think this adds like an extra layer when we're talking about the census. And I can't underscore all of the points that were talked about. I would just be repeating them, but it is so important for our community to actually be counted, because it is not just about, you know, fire department allocations, but it comes down to things like, you know, NASA using this in terms of looking at STEM fields and who is in the STEM field. It is looking at bilingual education, which is a huge piece that is very important for many of our families. And it is, again, about representation. So when we look at across every sector, and I use Boston, but it's a national issue, when we look across every sector, healthcare, higher education, government, philanthropy, you name it, we do not have representation. There are no Latinos representing us in major decision-making places. And we know that when we actually have people who have a lived experience, who are from the community, who understand the culture and speak the language, that better policies are made. So at the end, all of those things trickle down. And it goes back to, again, the redistricting and all of those pieces. I can't underscore why it's so important. I think the layer piece around our families and the trust is huge. And so because, you know, we are targeted, we feel targeted, we see it, you know, on TV every day, the attacks, you know, the violence, et cetera, it makes it even more imperative that our community-based organizations are involved, especially, and most especially, are culturally and linguistically diverse organizations. And I will say something that I'm sure Sebastian is not gonna like, but I have to say it because this is what I do, this is my job. You know, the dollars that have been put forth, they are beyond what, you know, the city or the mayor can allocate. It's also federal. And so when we look at the fact that the census is not being funded adequately. That trickles down to us. And I know you only have a certain amount of dollars, but when I look at some of the opportunities to work on this, the $5,000 to $10,000 grant, it's a big lift for an organization. We're a small organization. We're going to be doing our own kind of information pieces where we can around the census, but we're already a tapped out organization. We don't have enough staff to already do the work that we're doing. We are over-tasked and under-resourced. So I would say that it's a great intent, and I don't want to minimize that. And again, I don't think it's, it's not the city per se, but I think it's an opportunity as we look at ourselves in healthcare, as we look at ourselves in philanthropy, how can those places and business, corporate, et cetera, how can those places actually provide support to the city so they can actually have larger grants so that people can really work on this. And it's, again, people that are not just people that, I learned Spanish when I went to Latin America. That's great. I don't want to minimize that, but it is also people that are from the community, that people know, that people trust, to really, again, assist our families, because it's very scary to think about putting down information about yourself, given everything that you see on TV. So it is really important that community-based organizations are involved. And I know for many of us, we do what we can, but to have greater resources would be really great. We will continue to advocate for adequate funding, with the city to help them get more dollars. And again, a call to action to our city. This is really important. You heard earlier about how not counting really affects those bottom lines. It's going to affect all of us across the board. And really making sure that we will help with recruiting families and young people. I think there are many young people who are eager and are from the community, speak the language, that can be hired. So we will continue to help recruit those young people. I would even say that this would be something that should be in partnership with Boston Public Schools, where it's in the school day, and there is information to the young people who can go back to their families and talk about, like, oh, this is not scary. I think we need to think about this in a way that's not just, here's some hours that you can come onto our site and you can fill out this application. It's going to be more than that. So we're going to have to be really creative. We're going to have to go where the community's at. If that means like you need to go to the nail salon and the salon parlor and sit there, or the laundromat, whatever, like meeting people where they're at, going to, wherever they go to mass, et cetera, those places where they are already participating. And I think that also, if we think about it in that way, we will be able to gain trust for us, going out into the community. I think that the last piece I'll say is, I'm not sure the role of health centers in counting, so I don't know the answer, but I would say that with the health centers that are in some of our hard to count communities, how can they also at the same time, when there are visits, to be able to talk to families, because those are also trusted individuals. So I think, again, it's just a call to action, and all of us, it's going to affect all of us. Latino, not Latino, doesn't matter. It affects all of us. The bottom line, if dollars don't come for our communities, where our schools are going to suffer, our services are going to suffer. So I think we're all in this together. So thank you very much.
Okay, while our panelists are getting settled, volunteers in the back of the room, can you start collecting cards? Again, if you are online, they will take your questions from the chat box and make sure that those make their way up. While they're coming, I am going to get on my little soapbox for a second, and then I will ask you all a very explicit question that I want to make sure that we cover. But I know a lot of you in the room are probably thinking, this is helpful information. These three panelists are amazing. How lucky are we to have them in our community? But what can I do? As an individual sitting here, as somebody that works at Boston Children's Hospital, what can I do? Well, I want to reassure you that you took the first step by being here today. You now, by virtue of being in this room or being online, probably know more than the general public about the census. And hopefully you understand the importance of it, particularly for very young children. So hopefully that will lead you to the next step of filling it out yourself when you see it, and awareness about the importance that you play as an individual in filling it out. And then thinking creatively with the patients and families that we interact with, that we work with, about how to ensure that they're doing the same. We see a lot of very complex children that come here. So through that span of like March until the end of April, beginning of May, they may have lots of subsequent appointments. So you could be talking about the importance of filling this out and saying, bring it to your next appointment. We can help you. We just saw this with medical deferred action. When our patients and families get letters from the government in the mail or things they don't understand, where do they bring those things? Even if they don't have to necessarily do with healthcare, they bring them to us. So we can be that resource for them. So I'm gonna ask the volunteers to bring up the cards, and while they're doing that, my first question to the panel, can we be very explicit, and this is for whoever wants to answer it, for households where individuals have green cards or they have unresolved documentation status, should they be filling out the census?
Well, is this on?
That's done. There you go.
Thank you. So the answer is yes. This is the analogy I like to give when I talk about why every single human being who is residing in the United States needs to fill out the census. Imagine that the census is how we decide how many life jackets we all need in our communities if there were a huge flood. You want a life jacket for every single person, whether they're an immigrant, whether they're 100 years old, whether they are 1 day old. We want to count every single person who is a resident in the United States. Immigration status is immaterial in the census. We want to make sure we count every single person, including every single little baby.
So this may be a little duplicative, but I think it's important, as it was said earlier, to reiterate these messages. We cannot say it enough. We cannot be clear enough. So this question is a follow-up. What is the likelihood that undocumented immigrants will be at risk if they fill out the census?
In terms of the potential there, again, your personal data will never be shared with any agency, department, office under strict severe penalties of imprisonment of up to 5 years or a monetary fine of $250,000 or both. I think in general, when you try to say what is Title 13 to people, it's a very technical thing that the average lay person is not going to comprehend. So as much as you can try to sort of disseminate for them the fact that it's safe and secure, please do so. You can, again, just simply state your data is safe. It will not be shared with anyone, including whether it's your landlord, whether it's the president, ICE, Homeland Security, whether it's the governor, Charlie Baker, it does not matter. No one except for the Census Bureau will ever see your personal data, and it can never be used against you in a courtroom of law.
I just wanted to add from the perspective of just a community person that I think that's why it's so important and why I was asked to be here is the role of community-based organizations and faith-based organizations, because you know, someone from the city saying that, I know you're trustworthy. But I think that's why it's important. And it's important for you all to be involved because you're also, families are coming and they trust you. So that trusted person is just so, so important. We could hire, 25,000 college students and, it would have some impact, but really the impact is going to be with who are the trusted members of the community and that people will actually believe, what Sebastian is saying.
And that's why I really appreciate Children's hosting this today, because it's hard for you to convey the trust on this issue if you don't believe it yourself. And so the extent to which you can understand the nature of the protections. We didn't mention them all, but there are data protections that are being built into the census this time around, these sort of this mathematical sort of fuzzying of the information to even further encrypt it so that anybody, including a hacker, wouldn't be able to reconstruct the statistics and figure out who you are in your house. So there are so many layers of protection sort of at each point in the process that are being built in the census in order to ensure the privacy of the data, so that we hope that you will feel confident being a trusted messenger, and that you will believe it too when you say the census is safe, it's easy, and important.
All right, next question. And I want to say we got so many amazing questions. Thank you all for your participation. If we don't get to your question, please make sure that you signed in up front, because we'll answer some of these questions in our newsletter. I also want to say this is not the last program we will be doing on the census. This is just the kickoff of our census programming, and there'll be plenty to come in the following months. So Nancy, this one is for you. The 1 million children that weren't counted in the last census, who are they? Where are they? Are they undocumented? Can you talk a little about that population?
You know, I don't really know, because we don't know. We don't know a lot about them. That number was derived by some pretty sophisticated demographers who took the census data, then lined it up with sort of vital statistics information, birth and immigration and migration data, and were able to see that there seemed to be this real mismatch. And so they backed out that there are about 1 million kids missed. We do know that there are certain communities that are certain households where I think surveys were done where they found they left kids off the form. So those are the examples I gave, where somebody lives in a multi-generational household and maybe the grandparent filled out the form and then talked about her own kids, but didn't include her kids' kids. So it's those kinds of complicated families where kids tend to get missed, but I don't know any specific information about who they are.
And that's a good example. The more complex the family, the more confusing the census can seem. So we have time for maybe just one more, and there's a couple questions that all have a very similar theme. Folks across Children's are amazing advocates for our housing insecure and our homeless families, so we have questions to that effect. Specifically, how are homeless populations going to be counted? What about families that are doubled up in shelter, fleeing domestic violence? How can they participate in the census?
So for those that are facing homelessness or housing instability, they will be having a sort of different census count. It's going to be called service-based enumeration, and that'll run from March 30th through April 1st. So right now we're actually in discussions with the Census Bureau to have an understanding of what, from the city's perspective, can we provide in terms of just packaging the data that all the shelter providers give the city existing today. The Department of Neighborhood Development has phenomenal partnerships with the providers throughout the city. That sort of says, based on your daily intake, just some simple demographic information around age, name. Obviously, the address would be the shelter that they're staying at, but nonetheless, we would have a majority of the data that would be captured what the census is looking for, which again is very basic data around these 10 questions that'll be on the form itself. But essentially, beyond just looking at potentially what the city could provide from a packaging of existing data standpoint, if that's not a possibility, what would happen then is simply saying, partnering with shelters and having an enumerator go each day and sort of do an intake day by day count, as well as asking the providers where are sort of the hot spots that people congregate when they don't go to the shelters, and sending enumerators out to those places.
All right, so Jamie's probably going to yell at me, but there's one more really, really good question that I want to ask. And Alex, I want to ask this one to you. It says, at Boston Children's Hospital, we're trauma-informed providers. We spend a great deal of time validating people of color's distrust in governmental institutions. This feels like a really big jump for us to say, don't worry about that census thing without breaking alliance. What language do you recommend we use to support these patients and families?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. And I wish I had an answer to you. I think that it needs to be said, and you're going to have to be courageous and be brave and bring it up, because it's really important. And I would say that the most important thing is that people know that you are sincere and that you are genuine and that you're being honest, and that it's presented in a way that is, you must fill this form out. No, it is acknowledging what's happening in this country, acknowledging, the fears, and saying, that I know, that there are these things in place that's going to protect you, but it is up to you. And these are the reasons why we think, you should fill it out. I mean, I think we are my organization is in a different place, obviously, because, we are Latino, we have the culture and language piece, et cetera, but it's still going to be challenging for us as well to go out there and say, hey, trust us that this is going to be okay. So I wish I had a better answer, but I think at the end of the day, it's really about being genuine and honest, and not presenting it as something that you're telling people and forcing them to, and acknowledging, what's happening.
Quickly, Sebastian, the last word on this one.
And I just wanted to add on to that too, is the fact that you are not alone. Again, you are a massive player in terms of the healthcare sphere in the city of Boston, but you do have community partners like Sociedad Latina. We plan to do a comprehensive plan with all those subcommittees I mentioned, so that we're hitting bodegas, beauty salons, laundromats, as well as faith-based organizations. So doing services and working with faith leaders to tell folks, here are some simple ways you can encourage participation. I think, again, much to Alex's point, is that there's not one single message that it's going to cause someone to want to participate. It's a series of multiple touch points in different spaces and different ways in which it's being said to really communicate to people why it's so important. And again, working in lockstep and collaboration with community-based partners and large institutions, I think that that's a winning strategy, or the best strategy that could possibly come about.
All right, with that, thank you everyone in the room. Round of applause for our guests, Sebastian, Alex, and Nancy. If you're interested in getting involved in census outreach or advocacy, please be in touch with the Office of Government Relations. Happy Latino Heritage Month. Oh, and valuations. Please fill out your evaluations that you received. It's been recorded and we are happy to share and distribute. So if you would like